My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 29 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I genuinely believed that being the dependable one was the same thing as being loved. I was wrong. The moment I figured that out, I was sitting at my desk at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, reviewing quarterly projections for a client, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost kept typing. I almost stayed in the version of my life where I didn't know what I was about to know. I picked up. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. She introduced herself as the contracts coordinator for the commercial kitchen equipment supplier my family had been working with for the past 4 months. She said she was calling to confirm a transfer of account ownership. She said my name had been removed from the primary account and replaced with my brother's name, effective the following Friday. She asked if I had any questions before the change was finalized. I had nothing but questions. Starting with, "Who authorized that?" She paused. "Your parents submitted the request," she said, "along with a signed letter stating that you had agreed to transfer your role in the business to your brother as planned. There was a copy of a letter on file. She could read it to me if I wanted." I told her yes, please read it. And she did, in that same even, professional tone. The letter said I had volunteered to step back. It said the business was always intended to be my brother's venture, and that I was simply helping in the early stages. It said I was grateful to pass the reins to him now that things were underway. I hadn't written that letter. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to a single word of it. Here's what was actually true. 8 months earlier, my parents had come to me with an idea. My brother had been drifting for a couple of years, bouncing between jobs, struggling to find his footing. My parents thought if he had something of his own, a real business, something with his name on it, he'd finally stabilize. They wanted to open a small catering company, the kind that does corporate lunches and private events. They said they just needed a little help getting it off the ground. They knew I had savings. They knew I had connections. They knew I'd spent the last 5 years building a career in business operations and that I understood contracts and vendor relationships and how to negotiate terms that didn't leave you underwater in the first quarter. I said yes. Of course I said yes. That's what I did. I put in $42,000 of my own money. Not a loan, they said. A family investment. I set up the LLC. I negotiated the lease on the commercial kitchen space. I vetted 3 equipment suppliers and locked in a financing agreement with one of them. I was the name on the contracts because I was the one with the credit history and the track record. My brother was going to run the day-to-day. My parents were going to handle client relationships. I was going to be, in their words, the quiet backbone. The one making sure the foundation didn't crack. I didn't even think to ask what I'd get in return, because this was family, and family didn't need a scoreboard. What I didn't know, what I was only learning right now from a contracts coordinator who had no idea she was dismantling my entire understanding of the past 8 months, was that my parents had been having a very different conversation behind my back, one where I was already supposed to be gone. I thanked her and asked her to put the change on hold pending verification. She agreed, politely. I hung up and sat very still for about 45 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and started pulling files. I'm a business operations consultant. I help mid-size companies build systems, clean up their processes, and stop losing money to inefficiency. I know how to follow a paper trail, and I am very, very good at finding the things someone hoped you wouldn't find. Within 2 hours, I had a picture that made my stomach drop. There was a chain of emails between my parents and my brother that had been CC'd to a shared family Gmail account I had set up at the beginning of the project for business correspondence. They had forgotten I had access to it, or maybe they hadn't thought it mattered. Either way, the emails were right there, organized neatly by date, going back 3 months. The earliest one was from my mother to my brother. Subject line, transition timeline. The body of the email said they wanted the business fully in his name before the first big event booking, which was scheduled for the spring. She said they needed it to look like his achievement going forward. She said, "And I want you to understand, I am reading this word for word." Rachel got us started. "But we don't want clients or family friends thinking she's the one running it. This needs to be David's success story. She'll understand. She's always been the practical one." My brother replied with one line. Works for me. Just keep her happy until it's done. Keep her happy until it's done. I read that 7 times. I wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading it. I wasn't. There were more emails. One where my father outlined how to handle the vendor transfer without alerting me. One where my mother drafted the letter that was now sitting in the equipment supplier's files with my name on it, a letter I had never seen, never written, never signed. One where my brother asked if they needed to actually pay me back the $42,000, and my father replied, "She called it an investment in the family. Investments don't always have a return." I closed my laptop. I went to the window and looked out at the parking lot below my office for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was doing something colder and quieter than crying. I was calculating. I want to ask you something before I tell you what happened next. Have you ever had a moment where you realize the version of yourself that showed up for your family, the dependable one, the capable one, the one who never asked for anything in return, that version was never actually respected? It was just useful. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with that realization, and it doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like clarity. And clarity, in my experience, is the most dangerous thing a person like me can have. Because here's what my parents forgot. They forgot that I was the one who set up the LLC, my name. They forgot that I was the primary signatory on the commercial kitchen lease, my name. They forgot that the equipment financing agreement was tied to my credit, my personal guarantee, my signature. They forgot that the catering license application had listed me as the responsible party because my brother had 2 unpaid parking fines and a collections account that made the licensing board nervous. Every single legal thread that held that business together ran through me. They had been planning to pull me out of the picture, like removing a pin from a wall hanging and expecting the frame to stay up. I called my best friend and talked for 20 minutes. She listened, and then she said, "You already know what you're going to do." I said, "I do." She said, "Then stop talking to me and go do it." That's why she's my best friend. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I just got in the car and drove the 40 minutes with the radio off, going over everything in my head like a rehearsal. By the time I pulled into their driveway, I was not angry. I was precise. My mother answered the door in her gardening clothes, a little surprised to see me on a Wednesday. She smiled and stepped back to let me in. My brother was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling on his phone. My father was in the living room with the newspaper. A perfectly ordinary morning, in a household that had apparently been quietly engineering my erasure for 3 months. I sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. I put my phone face up between us and pressed play on a recording app. My mother looked at it. My brother looked at it. My father walked in from the living room, and when he saw my expression, his posture changed. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here because I received a phone call yesterday from our equipment supplier asking me to confirm a transfer of account ownership that I never authorized. And when I looked into it, I found emails describing a plan to move the business into my brother's name without telling me, using a letter I never wrote, and treating my $42,000 contribution as a gift you've already decided I'm not getting back." My mother started to speak. I held up one hand. "I want to give you the chance to tell me I'm wrong," I said. "Tell me there's an explanation. Tell me that letter was a mistake. Tell me the emails mean something different than what they say." Nobody said anything. My father exhaled and looked at the floor. My mother pressed her lips together. My brother set down his coffee very carefully. Then my mother said, "We just wanted this to be David's thing. You have your career. You don't need this business the way he does. We thought you'd be proud to see him succeed." I stayed very calm. "I want you to think carefully," I said, "about what you just told me. That my $42,000, my credit, my contracts, my license application, all of it was deployed to build something. And now that it's built, I should step aside and be proud. Without being asked. Without discussion. After you drafted a letter in my name to make it look voluntary." My father tried a different angle. "You know how hard it's been for your brother. You've always been the strong one. We knew you'd land on your feet no matter what." There it was. The phrase I'd been hearing my whole life, dressed up in different costumes. The strong one, the capable one, the practical one, the one who doesn't need anything because she always figures it out. The one whose feelings are a logistical problem to be managed rather than a reality to be respected. I picked up my phone and turned off the recording. Then I said, "Here's what I need you to understand. I'm not going to argue about whether this was fair. We can see it differently all you want. What I'm telling you is what happens next. The LLC is in my name. The lease is in my name. The equipment financing is under my personal guarantee. The catering license lists me as the responsible party. None of that transfers without my cooperation. And effective today, I am withdrawing that cooperation." My brother's face changed. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not signing any transfer documents," I said. "It means I'm calling the equipment supplier this afternoon to confirm that the account ownership change is not authorized by me. It means I'm contacting the kitchen space landlord to clarify the lease situation. It means every vendor who has been operating under the assumption that this is a stable, properly documented business is going to find out that there is a dispute at the ownership level. And disputes make vendors nervous. Nervous vendors pause service agreements. Paused service agreements mean you have no kitchen, no equipment, and no supplies for the spring booking calendar that my brother has already started promoting." My mother stood up. "You would do that to your own family?" I looked at her for a moment before I answered. "You removed me from the picture of my own business and forged a letter with my name on it." I said, "I want you to sit with the fact that you're asking me that question." My father said, "You're blowing this up over hurt feelings." "I'm not hurt," I said. "And I meant it. I'm done. Those are different things." I drove back to my office and spent the rest of the day making phone calls. Not angry calls. Calm, professional, documented calls. I called the equipment supplier and rescinded the transfer request in writing. I emailed the kitchen space landlord and CC'd my personal attorney to note that no sublease or ownership change had been authorized. I called the two vendors we had pending agreements with and let them know the account structure was under internal review and to hold any new charges pending clarification. Then I called the catering license office and asked what the process would be for updating the responsible party designation, just so I understood the timeline. Every one of those calls took about 4 minutes. Every one of them sent a quiet shockwave through the business my family had been building on my foundation while planning to erase my name from the front door. Before I tell you what happened next, because things did get significantly more complicated before they got clearer, I want to ask you something. If you found out your family had been running a parallel conversation about your role in their lives, one where your contribution was the plan, but your credit was an inconvenience, what would you do? Would you try to smooth it over to keep the peace? Or would you let the consequences land where they were always going to land? I want you to answer that in the comments, because the responses I'm expecting will split pretty evenly, and I think that split says something important about how we're raised to think about family and obligation and what we owe people who love us imperfectly. The next 48 hours were loud. My phone became something I wanted to throw into a lake. My mother called 6 times. My father called twice, which was more than he'd called me in the previous 6 months combined. My brother sent a series of texts that moved through the stages of grief in real time, starting with disbelief, cycling through accusations, and landing eventually on something that almost resembled an attempt at accountability, though not quite. The text that stuck with me was this one. I knew it wasn't right. I just didn't push back because it was easier not to. I stared at that for a long time. My brother, the one who had been positioned as the victim of his own lack of success, the one I had quietly subsidized for years through loans that became gifts because my parents would say he just needed a little more time, had known the plan was wrong and chosen to go along with it because it was easier. That was the sentence that finally broke something loose in me. Not anger, something more like grief for the relationship I had believed we had. The day after that text, I got a call from someone I wasn't expecting. My aunt, my mother's older sister, who lives 3 states away and who I'd always assumed occupied the comfortable middle distance of family life, not close enough to be in the drama, not distant enough to be unaware of it. She said my mother had called her, upset, asking her to talk some sense into me. I waited for her to launch into the script. Instead, she said, "What did they do?" I told her. All of it. The emails, the letter, the timeline, the transfer request I hadn't authorized. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Your mother has been doing this your whole life and she doesn't even see it. When you started making real money, I watched it happen. You became the solution to every problem. And every time you stepped up, it reinforced for them that you didn't have needs the way everyone else did. You became infrastructure instead of a person. That's not love," she said. "That's convenience dressed up in family language." I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected anyone from my family to say the quiet part out loud. I told her it meant more than I could easily explain. She said she wasn't excusing what they'd done, but she also wasn't sure I should burn everything to the ground. She said, "You have the power here. Use it to reset the relationship, not just to punish them." I thought about that for a long time. I still think about it. What my aunt didn't know, what I hadn't told her yet, was that the situation had already gotten more complicated. Because when vendors start hearing about disputes, word moves. The kitchen space we were leasing was in a small commercial district where several food service businesses operated out of the same management company. Within a week of my calls, the management company had flagged our account for review. Nothing hostile, just standard procedure when there's a documented ownership question. But the flag meant that our spring booking window, the one my brother had already started promoting to potential clients, was now on hold pending resolution. My brother called me the night he found out about the flag. He wasn't angry this time. He sounded genuinely shaken. He said, "I have a client who wants to book us for a corporate event series. It's a 3-month contract." It would have been the first real revenue we'd seen. "And now I can't confirm anything because the lease is in review." I said, "I know." He said, "What do you want me to do?" "I want to be honest with you about what I said next, because it matters." I didn't tell him what I wanted. I asked him what he thought was right. I asked him if he had thought, at any point during the past 3 months when he was watching our parents put this plan into motion, about what it meant to build your success on someone else's erasure. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I thought about it. I told myself you'd probably be fine with it eventually because you always were. You always let things go." And that's the sentence right there. You always let things go. I had spent nearly a decade being reliable and accommodating and quietly absorbing the cost of everyone else's decisions. And what I had taught my family was not that I was generous. I had taught them that I was bottomless. That the account never ran out. That Lauren always lands on her feet and Rachel always lets things go, and whoever that steady, capable woman in your family is, she will absorb this too, and by next month, we won't even remember that there was anything to absorb. I said, "I'm not letting this one go." He said, "I know, and I think I needed that." The resolution. And there was one, though it didn't happen quickly, and it didn't feel triumphant the way it does in the stories where the wronged person delivers a speech and everyone applauds. Happened in my parents' dining room 3 weeks later. I had asked for the meeting. I had sent a written agenda in advance, 3 items, and I had noted that I was bringing my attorney on the phone if needed. That last part was important. Not because I planned to use her, but because it changed the tenor of the room. It turned a family argument into something with stakes and paperwork, and in my experience, paperwork makes people more honest. My parents were subdued. My brother was there. Brooke, his girlfriend of 2 years who had been tangentially involved in some of the planning conversations, had removed herself from the situation entirely, which I respected. My father spoke first. He said they had made a serious mistake. He used the word mistake. I let it sit without correcting him, because mistake was not quite what I would call a coordinated 3-month plan with drafted letters and a transfer timeline, but I also understood that mistake was the furthest he could get right now. And sometimes you take the step that's actually in front of you. My mother cried. She said she had convinced herself she was doing what was best for everyone. She said she thought I was too invested in my career to really want to be tied to a family business. She said she didn't want me to feel burdened. I told her gently that removing someone from their own investment without their knowledge is not the same as freeing them from a burden. She nodded. I don't know if it landed the way I meant it, but she nodded. Then I laid out what I was willing to do, and what I wasn't. I said I would stay on the LLC, not as a silent, invisible backer, but as a documented co-owner with a defined equity stake that reflected my contribution. I said I wanted the 42,000 formally recognized as an investment, not a gift, with terms that both sides agreed to in writing. I said the business could still be my brother's primary operation. I had no interest in running it day to day, but my name, my credit, my legal exposure were not going to continue funding something I had no formal stake in. I also said this, and I want you to hear this part carefully. I said that going forward, if any family member wanted my professional help or my financial support, it would come through a conversation that included terms, timeline, and a clear agreement about what I was getting in return. Not because I didn't love them, but because love is not the same as unlimited access. And I was done confusing the two. My brother asked if this meant I was pulling the lease and shutting everything down. I said no. I said if he was willing to build this honestly, I was still in. But I was in as a partner, not as infrastructure. He said he could work with that. I think he meant it. The documents were drafted over the following 2 weeks. My attorney reviewed everything. I now hold a documented 30% equity stake in the business, which reflects my initial investment plus the legal and operational groundwork I put in. My brother holds 50%. My parents hold the remaining 20%. It is not the arrangement my parents originally envisioned, but it is an honest one, and I have found that honest things hold up longer. The spring booking went through. The corporate client signed the 3-month contract. My brother handled the operations. I wasn't there cutting vegetables or directing staff. I was in my own office, doing my own work. But when the first invoice cleared, and the business made its first real revenue, my brother texted me a screenshot and wrote, "Couldn't have gotten here without the actual foundation." I think that was his version of an apology. I took it as one. My parents are still adjusting. My mother still sometimes talks about my brother's business in a way that minimizes my role, and then she catches herself and corrects it. That catching herself and correcting it, small and imperfect as it is, matters to me more than I expected. My father has started asking about my work in a way that sounds genuinely curious rather than politely obligatory. It's not a transformation. It's a recalibration. And I'm learning that recalibration is sometimes the most you can reasonably ask for from people who are trying. Here is what I know now that I wish someone had said to me at 22 when I first started being the dependable one. When you are reliably capable, people will stop asking if you need anything, because the asking feels redundant. They will begin to treat your resources as a renewable supply rather than a finite gift. They will tell themselves you don't mind, and they will say it so many times that they start to believe it. And eventually they will build plans around it without consulting you because your agreement has started to feel like a given. They are not always doing this out of malice. Sometimes it is just the slow erosion of the assumption that you will be fine. But the result is the same. You end up funding lives that don't include you. The most important thing I did was not pulling the vendors or calling the suppliers or sitting in that dining room with a written agenda. Those were the visible moves. The most important thing I did was decide that my presence was not optional, not in my own family, not in the business I built, not in any room where my money and my labor and my legal signature were sitting on the table while my name was being quietly walked toward the exit. I am still the dependable one. I don't think that's something I can or want to change. I like being the person people can count on. What I changed is the terms. What I changed is the assumption that dependable means available for whatever you need, whenever you need it, at whatever cost to me, seems convenient for you. I'll end with the question I started with. If you're the capable one in your family, the fixer, the one who covers the gaps and smooths the rough edges and never quite asks for anything in return, I want you to think seriously about this. What would it look like to audit that arrangement the way you'd audit anything else? Where is the value going? Who is investing back in you? Who treats your contribution as something to be grateful for, and who treats it as something to be managed? Setting a limit is not cruelty. Asking for what you're owed is not greed. And refusing to let your name be used to build something that doesn't include you is not burning the family down. It's just finally reading the contract you've been signing with your silence for years. So I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. If you found out your family had been planning to quietly transfer your investment out of your name while calling it a gift you'd already agreed to give, would you have done what I did? Would you have held the line? Or would you have told yourself it was easier just to let it go? And if you are the person in your family who always lets it go, what would it take for you to stop?